Good evening. Welcome. There isn't a country on the face of this earth doesn't have its share of criminals, bigots, drunkards. But I believe it could be proved with facts and figures that the only distinctly American criminal class is Congress. Now, suppose you were an idiot. Then suppose you were a member of Congress. But I repeat myself. It is easy to find fault if that is one's disposition. I knew a man once who, unable to find any fault with his coal, complained there were too many prehistoric toads in it. Well, character, howsoever good and fine, can easily be destroyed by ridicule, howsoever poor and witless. Observe the ass, for instance. His character is about perfect. He is the choicest spirit among all the humbler animals. But see what ridicule has brought him to? Instead of feeling complimented when we are called an ass, we are left in doubt. Adam suffered ridicule for many centuries, but he was human. That explains it all. He did not want the apple for the apple's sake, but because it was forbidden. The mistake was in not forbidding the serpent. Then he would have eaten the serpent, you see. I'll tell you a story. There's a fella here by the name of Jim Smiley, back in the winter of 49, or maybe it was spring of 50, I don't recollect exactly somehow, but what makes me think it was the one or t'other was the big flume wasn't finished when he first come up to camp. But anyways, he was the curiousest fella about always betting on anything come up you ever see, if he could get somebody to bet on the other side. And if he couldn't, he'd just change sides. Anyway, it suited the other fella, suited him. Anyway, so as he got his bet, he was satisfied. But still, he was lucky, uncommon lucky. Always ready and laying for a chance. Well, you couldn't mention one particular thing, but that fella had offered a bet on it. Take any side you please, as I was just telling you. If there was a horse race, you'd find him flush or you'd find him busted at the end of it. If there's a dog fight, he'd bet on it. If there's a cat fight, he'd bet on it. If there's a chicken fight, he'd bet on it. Two birds were sitting on a fence post, he'd bet you which one fly away first. If there was a camp meeting, he'd show up regular and bet on Parson Walker, which he judged to be the best exhorter in these parts, and he was too, and a good man. If he even see a straddle bug start to go anywheres, he'd bet you how long it'd take him to get where he was going to. And if you took him up on it, he'd follow that bug to Mexico. See how long he's on the road, where he's bound for. Well, some of the boys, they knew Jim Smiley and could tell you about him. But never made no difference to him. He bet on anything, dangest fella. Parson Walker's wife was laid up very sick once for a while, and it seemed they weren't going to be able to save her. He come in one morning, and Smiley asked him how she was. He said, she's considerable better. Thank the Lord for his infinite mercy. And coming on so smart that with the blessing of providence, she would get well. And Smiley, before he thought, says, I'll risk 2.5 she don't anyway. Yeah, this year Smiley had a mare. Boys called her the 15-minute nag. But that was all in fun, you understand, because she was faster than that. But he used to win money on that horse. For all she was so slow, always had the asthma or the distemper or consumption, something like that. They used to give a 200-300-yard start and then pass her underway. But always at the fag end of the race, she'd get excited and desperate like and come cavorting and spraddling up, her legs scattering around limber, sometimes up in the air and sometimes out to the side amongst the fences, and kicking up more dust, making more racket with all her sneezing and coughing and nose blowing, and always fetch up at the stand just about a neck ahead, as near as you can cipher it down. He had a little small bull pup, which to look at, you'd think he weren't worth more than a cent, but to sit around and look ornery, lay about for a chance to steal something. But when the money was up on him, he was a different dog. His underjaw'd stick out like the forecastle of a steamboat, and his teeth would uncover and shine savagely like the furnaces. Other dog might tackle him, bullyrag him, bite him, throw him over his shoulder 2 or 3 times, but Andrew Jackson's the name of the pup. Andrew Jackson never let on, but he was satisfied. Hadn't expected nothing else. And all the while, the bets are being doubled and doubled on the other side, till all the money was up. And then he'd grab hold of that other dog by the joint of the hind leg and freeze to it, not chaw, you understand. He'd grip and hold on till they threw up the sponge, if it was a year. Well, Smiley always come out a winner with that pup, till he harnessed the dog once, didn't have no hind legs, because they'd been sawed off in a circular saw. Well, they come along to the end of it, and all the money was up, and he went to snatch on his pet hold. Well, he saw in a moment he'd been imposed on. And the other dog had him in the door, so to speak, and he appeared surprised and looked sort of disgusted. And he didn't try no more to win that fight. He got shucked out pretty bad. He gave Smiley a look as much as to say his heart was broke. It was his fault for putting up a dog didn't have no hind legs for him to grab hold of, which was his main dependence in a fight. Well, he limped off a piece and laid down and died. He's a good pup, was Andrew Jackson. Could have made a name for himself if he'd lived, because the stuff was in him. He had the genius. I know, because he never had no opportunities. And it don't stand to reason that a dog could put up a fight like that in them circumstances if he hadn't had no talent. Yeah. I always feel sorry for that pup when I think back on that last fight of his. But this here Smiley, he had rat terriers and chicken cocks, tomcats, all them kind of things. And you couldn't fetch nothing for him to bet on, but he'd match you. One day he come home with a frog. Says he calculated to educate him. And he never done nothing for 3 months but sit in the backyard and learn that frog to jump. And you betcha he did learn him too. He'd hunch him from the backside, and next minute you'd see that frog whirling through the air like a donut. You'd see him turn one somerset, maybe a couple, if he got a good start, and come down again flat-footed and all right like a cat. Yeah, he had him up to catching flies. Had him in practice so constant that he could nail a fly every time as far as he could see him. Yeah, Smiley said all a frog wanted was education, and he could do anything. I believe him. I seen him set old Daniel Webster on the floor there. Daniel Webster's the name of the frog. Seen him set old Daniel Webster there and sing out, "Flies, Daniel, flies." And before you could blink, he'd spring up, snake a fly off the counter there, and land down solid as a gob of mud, fall to scratching the side of his head with his hind foot, as indifferent as if he hadn't done any more than any frog might do. You never seen a frog so modest and straightforward as Daniel Webster, for all he was so gifted. Well, and when it come to fair and square jumping on a dead level, he could cover more ground in one straddle than any animal of his breed you ever see. Jumping on a dead level was his strong suit, you understand? And Smiley would ante up money on him as long as he had a red. Smiley's monstrous proud of that frog. And well he might be, too, for fellas who had traveled and seen everything said he laid over every frog they ever see. Well, now, he kept him in a little lattice box, and he'd fetch him downtown sometimes, lay for a bet. Well, a fella come by, stranger to the camp, and he says, "What might it be you got in that box?" Smiley answered him sort of indifferent like, well, it might be a parrot. And it might be a canary, but it ain't. It's only just a frog. Well, he took that box, he turned it this way and that, and then set it down and say, "Well, what's he good for?" Smiley said, "Well, he's good for one thing, I should judge. He can out-jump every frog in Calaveras County." Now, stranger took the box again, gave it one long, particular look. Then he said, "I don't see no points about that frog's any different than any other frog." Smiley said, "Maybe you don't. Maybe you don't understand frogs. Maybe you do understand them. Maybe you've had experience. Maybe you ain't only just an amateur. But I got my opinion, and $40 says he can out-jump every frog in Calaveras County." Well, stranger studied a minute. Said, kind of sad, "Well, I'm just a stranger here. I ain't got no frog. If I did, I'd bet you." Smiley said, "Well, that's all right. That's all right. You keep this box a minute, I'll get you frog." And stranger took the box and laid his $40 down alongside old Smiley's and set about to wait. As he's waiting, he set to thinking. And then he picked up that frog, and he prized his mouth open. He took out a teaspoon and filled him full of quail shot. Filled him pretty near up to the chin and set him down. Smiley goes out to the swamp. He's slopping around in the mud. Finally, he catched the frog, fetched him in, gave him to the stranger. Say, "Now you set him down alongside old Daniel. You set him so his forepaws is equal to Daniel's, and I'll give the count." And then he say 1, 2, 3, and that new frog hopped off lively. But old Daniel, he kind of heaved and hoisted his shoulders up so like a Frenchman. But he couldn't budge. He was set solid as an anvil. No more stir if he'd been anchored out. Smiley appeared surprised. Stranger took his money and headed for the door. As he's going out, he throws his thumb back over his shoulder, pointing at that frog, saying, I don't see no points about that frog's any different than any other frog. And he went out. Smiley stood there scratching his head for a minute. And then he say, I wonder why he throwed over like that. I wonder if there ain't something the matter with him. And he bent down to pick him up and said, well, blame my cats if he don't weigh 5 pounds. And he picked him up, turned him upside down. He belched out about a double handful of shot. And then he seed how it was. And he was the maddest man. And he went out after that stranger. But he never catched him. This year Smiley had a one-eyed yellow cow, didn't have no tail, only a stump about the size of a banana. Yeah. Curse Smiley and that afflicted cow. Many years ago, when I was a boy of 15 years, helping to inhabit a Missourian village on the banks of the Mississippi, I had a friend whose society was very dear to me because it was prohibited by my mother to partake of it. Now, he was a satirical, impudent, fine young black man, a slave. And he used to practice preaching sermons on top of his master's woodpile. He imitated the pulpit style of some of the clergy of our village, and he did it well. Fine energy and passion. To me, he was a wonder. I thought he was the greatest orator in the United States and would one day be heard from. But it did not happen. In the distribution of rewards, he was overlooked. It is the way in this world. Now, he used to interrupt his sermons to saw a stick, but the sawing was just a pretense. He did it with his mouth. He exactly imitated the sound a bucksaw makes when it is shrieking through wood, so his master wouldn't come out and see how the work was getting along. I used to listen to him through an open window in the lumber room back of our house. One of his texts was, you show me where a man gets his corn pone, and I'll tell you what his opinions is. You show me where a man gets his corn pone, and I'll tell you what his opinions is. I can never forget it. It was impressed upon me by my mother, not upon my memory, but elsewhere. She had slipped in on me while I was absorbed in his preaching. The black philosopher's idea was this, that man is not independent and cannot afford views that interfere with his bread and butter. If he would prosper, he must train with the majority. In matters of great moment like politics and religion, he must feel and think with his neighbors or suffer damage to his social standing and his business prosperities. He must restrict himself to corn-pone opinions, at least on the surface. Now, political emergencies bring out corn-pone opinions in fine force in both their varieties, the pocketbook variety, which has its origin in self-interest, and the bigger variety, the sentimental variety, which cannot bear to be beyond the pale, cannot bear to be on the outside, cannot endure the averted face and the cold shoulder, which wants to be on the inside, wants to be welcomed, wants to be smiled upon, which wants to hear those precious words, he's on the right track, uttered, perhaps, by a jackass. But a jackass of high degree, a jackass whose approval is gold and diamonds to the smaller jackass, and confers upon him glory and honor, happiness, membership in the herd. For these gauds, many a man would dump his lifelong principles in the street and his conscience along with it. We've seen it happen millions of times. We do no end of feeling, but we mistake it for thinking. Out of this we get an aggregate. We call it a boon. Its name is public opinion. It is held in reverence. Settles everything. Some think it the voice of God, perhaps. Well, I suppose in more cases than we care to admit, we have two sets of opinions. One private, the other public. One secret and sincere, the other corn-pone and more or less tainted. I want to share with you a snippet of a polite conversation that might have been heard around the fireside in the England of Queen Elizabeth, if I can assume my English airs. Yesternight, it befell that the Queen took to herself a fantasy such as she sometimes hath, and took to her closet certain that do write books, plays, and such like, these being my Lord Bacon, the worshipful Sir Walter Raleigh, the child Francis Beaumont, the learned Mr. Ben Jonson, and along with these came the famous Shakespeare, a right strange mixing of mighty blood and mean, made all the more special by the Queen's Grace's presence, and these following, to wit, the Duchess of Bilgewater, 22 years of age, the Countess of Granby, age 26, her daughter, Lady Helen, age 15, and two maids of honor, to wit, Lady Marjorie Boothie, 65, and Lady Alice Dilbury, turned 70, being 2 years the Queen's Grace's presence. I, being Her Majesty's cupbearer, had no choice but to remain behind, and behold rank forgot, and the high hold converse with the low as upon equal terms. A great scandal did the world hear thereof. In the heat of the talk, it befell that one did break wind, yielding an exceeding mighty and distressful stink, whereat they all did laugh, and then the Queen said, "Verily, in mine 68 years have I not heard the fellow to this fart. Meseemeth by the great sound and clamor of it that it was male. Yet the belly it did lurk behind should now fall lean and flat against the spine of him that was delivered of so vast a bulk. Whereas the guts of them that do quiff splitters bear stand comely firm and round. Let the author confess the offspring." My Lady Alice, Oh, good your highness, and I could hold such a thunder gust within mine ancient bowels, 'tis not in reason I could discharge the same and live to thank God that he did choose a handmaid so humble whereby to show his power. It was not I that brought forth this rich o'ermastering fog, this fragrant gloom. I pray ye seek ye elsewhere. Mayhap the Lady Marjorie hath done the company this favor. Oh, so please your highness, my limbs are feeble with the weight and drought of 65 winters, and it behoveth that I be yet tender unto them. In the great providence of God had I contained this wonder. Forsooth, would I have spent the whole evening of my sinking life in dribbling it forth, not launched it sudden in its matchless might, taking mine own life with violence, and rending my weak frame like rotten rags. It was not I. Well, in heaven's name, who hath favored us? Hath it come to pass that a fart shall fart itself? Not such a one as this, I trow. Young Master Beaumont, oh, but no, 'twould have wafted him to heaven like the down of a goose's body. No, and 'twas not my little Lady Helen. Nay, ne'er blush, my child. Thou tickle thy tender maiden head with many a mousy squeak before thou learn'st to blow a hurricane like this. It wasn't you, my learned and ingenious Johnson? Oh, so fell a blast hath ne'er mine ears saluted, nor yet a stench so all-pervading and immortal. 'Twas not a novice did this, good your grace, but one of veteran experience, else had he failed in confidence. It was not I. My Lord Bacon, oh, not from my lean entrails did this prodigy burst forth. No, good your highness, nothing so befits the great as great performance, and haply you may find 'tis not from mediocrity this miracle hath issued. What saith the worshipful Master Shakespeare? In the great hand of God I stand, and thus proclaim mine innocence, though the sinless hosts of heaven had foretold the coming of this most desolating breath, proclaiming it the work of uninspired man, its quaking thunders, its firmament-clogging rottenness, his own achievement in due course of nature, yet had I not believed it, but had said the pit itself did furnish forth the stink, and heaven's artillery hath shook the globe in admiration of it. Then there was a silence, and each did turn him to the worshipful Sir Walter Raleigh, who, rising, did smile and simpering say, it was I that did it, good your grace. Yet it was of such poor and frail a note that I was ashamed to call the weakling mine in so august a presence. It was nothing, so please your highness, less than nothing. I did it but to clear my nether throat. Had I come prepared, I could have delivered something worthy. Bear with me while I make amends. Then delivered he himself of such a godless and rock-shivering blast that all were fain to stop their ears at the sound of it, and it was followed by a stench so dense and foul that it made the others seem poor and weak beside it. And then saith he, I perceive that I am weak today and cannot justice do unto my powers. And he sat him down. I want to read you a passage from a book I wrote called Huckleberry Finn. You don't know me without you have read a book called The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. But that's no matter. That book was made by Mr. Mark Twain, and in it he told the truth, mainly. There's some things that he stretched, but mostly he told the truth. That's nothing. I never knowed anybody didn't tell a lie one time or another. Without it was Aunt Polly or the widow, maybe Mary. Aunt Polly, that's Tom's Aunt Polly. And Mary and the widow Douglas, they're all told about in that book, which mostly told the truth, with some stretchers, as I said to you. When Tom and I come to the edge of the hill, we looked down into the village, and we saw 3 or 4 lights twinkling where maybe there were sick folks. And above us, the stars were sparkling so fine. And down by the village, the river, about a mile broad, and awful still and grand. And we went down the hill, and we got Ben Rogers and Joe Harper and 2 or 3 more of the boys that were hid in the old tan yard. And then we unhitched a skiff and pulled down river 2.5 miles to where the big scar was on the hillside. And there we went ashore. Well, we come to a clump of bushes. And Tom swore everybody to secrecy. And then he showed them a hole in the hill in the thickest part of the bushes. Well, we lit the candles and we crawled on our hands and knees. Crawled about 200 yards, and then the cave opened up. And Tom explored along the walls, and he ducked under a passage where you wouldn't have thought there was a hole. And we followed him down and come to a room, and it was all damp and clammy and sweaty. And there we stopped. And Tom says, "All right now, let's start this band of robbers. And we will call it Tom Sawyer's Gang. And any boy that wants to be in the gang must swear an oath and sign his name in blood." And everybody was willing. So he took out the paper he wrote the oath on, and it swore every boy to stick to the gang and not to tell any of its secrets. And if anybody hurt any boy that was in the gang, whichever boy was ordered to kill that person and his family must do it. And he mustn't eat and he mustn't sleep until he'd killed them and hacked a cross in their breast, which was the sign of the gang. And anybody that tried to use that mark that wasn't in the gang must be sued. And if he did it again, he must be killed. And any boy that told the secrets of the gang must have his throat cut and his body burnt up and his ashes scattered all around, his name blotted off the list in blood and never mentioned again, and a curse put upon him and forgot forever. Everybody thought it was a beautiful oath. And they asked Tom if he got it out of his own head, and he said some of it. But mostly it come from pirate books and robber books, and every gang that was high-toned had it. And then they pricked the thumbs to get blood and signed the oath. Now I made my mark. And some thought it would be good to kill the families of the boys that told the secrets. And Tom thought that was a good idea, so he pulled out a pencil and wrote it in. And then Ben Rogers says, well, what about Huck Finn? He ain't got no family. Well, ain't he got a father, says Tom. Well, yes, he has, but you never see him around. Used to lay drunk with the hogs in the tan yard. But he ain't been seen around these parts for 2 years or more. Well, then they fell to talking. And I thought they was going to rule me out because they said every boy must have a family or somebody to kill, or it wouldn't be fair and square to the others. So they was stumped and couldn't think of what to do. And I was most ready to cry. And then I thought of a way. I could give them Ms. Watson. They could kill her. And they said, oh, she'll do. That's all right. Huck can come in. And then Ben Rogers say, I want to know what is the line of business of this gang. Nothing but robbery and murder, says Tom. Well, what are we going to steal? We going to steal cattle or houses or stuff. Stealing cattle and that kind of thing ain't robbery, it's burglary. We ain't burglars. We are highwaymen. We stop stages and carriages. We wear masks. We kill people and we take their watches and the money. Well, must we always kill the people? Well, certainly it's best. Some authorities think different, but most people think it's best to kill the people, except for some you bring back here to hold for ransom. Ransom? What is that? Well, I don't know. But it's what they do. It's in the book, so of course we got to do it. Well, how are we supposed to do it if we don't know what it is? Well, blame it all. We got to do it. Don't I tell you it's in the books? Do you want to go doing things different than what's in the books, get things all muddled up? Oh, it's fine for you to talk that way, Tom Sawyer. But how in the nation are these fellas ever going to get ransomed if we don't know how to do it to them? That's the thing I want to get at. What do you reckon it is? Well, I don't know. But maybe if we keep them here till they're ransomed, it means we keep them here till they're dead. Well, now that's something like. That'll answer. Why couldn't you have said that before? We'll just keep them here till they're ransomed to death. And a bothersome lot they'll be, too, eating up everything and always trying to get loose. Ben Rogers, how you talk. How they going to get loose when they got a guard sitting over them ready to shoot them down if they move a peg? A guard? Is that so? You mean somebody got to stay up all night and never get any sleep just so he can watch them? I think that's foolishness. Why can't a body take a club and ransom them as soon as they get here? Because it ain't in the books that way. That's why. Blame it all, Ben Rogers. Don't you reckon the people that made the books knows the correct way to do things? Do you reckon you can learn them anything? Not by a good deal. No, we are going to ransom them the regular way. Well, all right, if that's the way it is. Say, do we kill the women too? Ben Rogers, if I was as ignorant as you, I wouldn't let on. Kill the women? Nobody ever read anything like that in the books. No. No, you bring them back here, and you're always polite as pie to them. Pretty soon they fall in love with you, and they don't want to go home no more. Well, if that's the way it is, then I'm agreed, but I don't put much stock in it. Mighty soon, this place will be cluttered with women and fellas waiting to be ransomed. There won't be no place for the robbers. But go ahead, I ain't saying anything. Well, little Tommy Barnes was asleep now, and they waked him up. And he was scared, and he cried and wanted to go home to his ma. He didn't want to be a robber no more. So they made fun of him, called him Crybaby, and that made him mad. And he said he's going to tell all the secrets. So Tom gave him 5 cents to keep quiet. And then they decided to meet next week and rob somebody and kill some people. But Ben Rogers said he couldn't get out much except on Sundays. So he wanted to meet on Sunday, but they all agreed it'd be wicked to do that kind of thing on a Sunday. So that settled that. They decided to meet soon and fix a day. We elected Tom Sawyer first captain of the gang and Joe Harper second captain. Everybody started home. And I clumb up on the wood pile and crept in the window just as day was breaking. My new clothes were all greased and clayey, and I was dog-tired. I'm a little tired myself. I'm going to go rest my eyes. If you're here when I come back, I will read to you from an unpublished manuscript. Dear Mark Twain, why do you speak so disparagingly of babies? I have one, and I can tell you a baby is a thing of beauty and a joy forever. Dear young mother, I assume you are referring to my statement that a baby is an inestimable blessing and a bother. But you say a baby is a thing of beauty and a joy forever. It is a very touching sentiment, but not very original. Every cow thinks the same of its own calf. I honor the cow for it. We all honor that tender maternal instinct wherever we find it. But when I come to examine the matter in all its bearings, I find that your assertion does not assert itself in all cases. A soiled baby with a neglected nose cannot conscientiously be called a thing of beauty. And inasmuch as babyhood spans 3 short years, no baby can competently be called a joy forever. Aside from that, I agree with you. In 1858, I was a steersman on board that swift and popular St. Louis, New Orleans packet, the Pennsylvania, Captain Kleinfelter. I had been lent out to Mr. Brown, one of the pilots of the Pennsylvania, by my owner, Mr. Bixby, and I was steersman for 18 months. In the early days of May 1858, came a tragic trip, the final trip of that fleet and famous steamboat. I have told all about it in a book I wrote called Life on the Mississippi. But it is not likely that I told about the dream. It is impossible I would have published it because I did not want my mother to know about the dream, and she lived several years after that volume was published. I had gotten my brother Henry a position on the Pennsylvania. It was a position of promise, not of profit. He was a mud clerk. Mud clerks received no salary, but they were in line for promotion. A mud clerk could presently become third clerk or second clerk or first clerk, or that is, purser. Now the dream begins when Henry had been mud clerk for 3 months. We had come to port in St. Louis. Now, pilots and steersmen have nothing to do in the 3 days that a boat is in port at St. Louis or New Orleans. But mud clerks must begin their duties at dawn and continue into the evening by the light of torches. So Henry and I, moneyless and unsalaried, had billeted ourselves upon our brother-in-law, Mr. Moffett, as night lodgers, but we took our meals on board the boat. Well, no, I should not say Henry lodged there. I did, but he stayed in the evenings from 9 till 11, but then he had to go back to the boat to be ready for his early duties. One evening at 11 o'clock, we shook hands goodbye with the family, as was the custom. Now, I do not say it was the custom of that particular family. It was the custom of the region, the custom of Missouri, I should say. I never saw one member of the Clemens family kiss another one, except once, when my father lay dying at our home in Hannibal. And he reached his arm around my sister's neck and pulled her down, and he kissed her and said, "Let me die." I remember that. I remember the death rattle that swiftly followed upon those words, which were his last. These goodbyes were always said in the family room on the second floor, and Henry left that room and went downstairs without further ceremony. My mother followed him to the head of the stairs to say goodbye again. I remember that she did this because of something in Henry's manner, and she stayed at the head of the stairs and watched him descend. When he got to the door, he hesitated. Then he turned around and went back upstairs and shook hands goodbye again. In the morning, when I woke, I had been dreaming, and the dream was so vivid, so like reality, that I was deceived by it. I thought it was real. I had dreamed Henry a corpse, lying in a metallic box, dressed in a suit of my clothing, and on his breast was a large bouquet of flowers, mostly white roses, and in the center one red rose. I wanted to go into that room, but I did not want to meet my mother. I thought I should take time to prepare for that ordeal. And then I woke. In the morning, we made that eventless trip down to New Orleans. No, I should not say eventless, because it was on that trip I had the fight with Mr. Brown, which resulted in his requiring that I remain ashore in New Orleans. Now, in New Orleans, I always had a job. It was my privilege to watch the freight piles from 7 in the evening till 7 in the morning for $3. It was a 3-night job. It occurred every 37 days. Henry would join me on my watch after he finished his duties, and we made my rounds and chatted till midnight. This was the first time we were to part, and I gave him some advice. I said, if a disaster should strike the boat, don't lose your head. Leave that to the passengers. They are competent. They will attend to it. You make your way to the hurricane deck in the stern, to the solitary lifeboat that is lashed aft the wheelhouse. Obey the mate's orders, thus you will be useful. Before they launch the boat, give what help you can to women and children getting into the boat, but don't get in yourself. It is summer weather. The river is only a mile wide as a rule. You can easily swim ashore. Two or 3 days later, the boat's boilers exploded at Ship Island, just south of Memphis. I've told about that in Life on the Mississippi. I followed the Pennsylvania a day later on another boat, and we got the news at every port we touched at, so by the time we got to Memphis, we knew the whole story. I found Henry lying on a mattress on a floor of a great building, surrounded by 30 or 40 other scalded and wounded. And I was told promptly by an indiscreet person that he had inhaled steam and was badly scalded and would live but a little while. The physicians and nurses could pay scant attention to those who would not make it. They were short-handed in the matter of physicians and nurses and could only attend to Henry from time to time from the more urgent cases. But Dr. Peyton was a fine and large-hearted physician, and he heard me with sympathy. He took vigorous hold of the case, and in a week, Henry had turned round. He was not a man given to prognostications of things that might not occur. But at 11 o'clock one night, he told me Henry was out of danger and would get well. He said, at midnight, all these fellers that lie around here and there and all over the place will begin to mourn and lament and weep with outcries. And if it should disturb Henry, it could be bad for him. Tell the physicians on the watch to give him 1/8 of a grain of morphine, but only if he shows signs of being disturbed. The rest is no matter. The physicians on the watch were young fellas just out of medical college, and they made a mistake. They had no means of measuring an eighth of a grain of morphine, and they gave him a vast amount on the edge of a knife. Henry died at dawn, I believe. I don't remember. They came and took him to the dead room, and I went and spent a while at a citizen's house sleeping off my accumulated fatigue. The coffins for the dead were all of unpainted white pine. But in this instance, some of the ladies of Memphis had made up a fund of $60, and they bought for Henry a metallic case. When I came back in the dead room, I saw him lying in that open case, dressed in a suit of my clothing. And instantly I recognized the dream in all its details. One detail I think was missing, but that was immediately supplied. An elderly woman entered the room carrying an enormous bouquet of flowers, mostly white roses, one red rose in the center. And she laid it on his breast. I read this manuscript to my daughter Jean and some friends. And afterward, they all said, "Oh, but you must not publish that." Just a little while ago, my friend Dan Beard came by, and I read it to him. And afterward, he said, "Oh, but you must publish that." I told him, "In that I have told the whole truth, and only dead men can tell the truth in this world. It can be published when I'm gone. I'll let you be the judge." It was a time of great and exalting excitement. The war was on. The country was up in arms. In every breast burned the holy fire of patriotism. The drums were beating, the bands playing, toy pistols popping, bunched firecrackers hissing and sputtering. And in every hand, and far on down the receding and fading spread of roofs and balconies, a fluttering wilderness of flags flashed in the sun. Daily, the young volunteers marched down the wide avenue, gay and fine in their new uniforms. Their proud fathers and mothers, sisters, sweethearts, cheering them on with voices choked with emotion as they swung by. Nightly, in the packed meeting houses, they listened, panting, to patriot oratory, which moved the deepest deeps of their hearts. which they interrupted at briefest intervals with cyclones of applause, tears streaming down their faces the while. In the churches, the pastors preached devotion to flag and country and invoked the God of battles, seeking his aid and comfort in our good cause. In outpourings of fervid eloquence which moved every listener. It was indeed a glad and gracious time. And the half-dozen rash spirits that ventured to disapprove of the war and cast a doubt upon its righteousness got such a stern and angry warning that for their personal safety's sake they shrank quickly out of sight and offended no more in that way. Sunday morning came. The next day the battalions would go to the front. The volunteers were there. Their young faces alight with martial dreams, with visions of the stern advance, the gathering momentum, the rushing charge, the flashing sabers, the flight of the enemy, the enveloping smoke, the tumult, the fierce pursuit, the surrender. Then home again. Bronzed heroes welcomed and adored, awash amidst a sea of glory. With the volunteers sat their dear ones, proud and happy, envied of their neighbors, who had no brothers or sons to send to the fields of honor, there to win for flag and country, or, failing, die nobly the noblest of deaths. The service proceeded. A war chapter from the Old Testament was read. The first prayer was said. It was followed by an organ burst that shook the building. With one impulse, the house rose and poured out that tremendous invocation, God, the all-terrible, thou that ordainest thunder thy clarion, and lightning thy sword. It was followed by the long prayer. None could remember the like of it for passionate pleading, or beautiful and moving language. The burden of its supplication was that an ever merciful and benignant Father of us all watch over our noble young soldiers, aid, comfort, and encourage them in their patriotic work. Bless them, shield them on the day of battle, the hour of their peril. Bear them in his mighty hand. Make them strong and confident, invincible at the bloody onset. Help them to crush the foe and win for flag and land imperishable glory and honor. A stranger entered. With slow and noiseless step, he made his way up the main aisle, his eye fixed on the minister, his long body clothed in a robe which reached to his feet, his white hair descending in frothy cataracts to his shoulders, his seamy face unnaturally pale even to ghastliness. With all eyes watching and wondering, he made his silent way and without pausing ascended to stand beside the minister. With shut lids, the minister, unconscious of his presence, continued with his moving prayer and finished at last with the words, "Grant us victory, O Lord our God." The stranger touched his arm and motioned him to step aside, which the startled minister did, and then he took his place. For some time, he surveyed the spellbound audience with solemn eyes lit by an uncanny light. Then in a deep voice, he said, I come from the throne, bearing a message from Almighty God. The words smote the building with a shock. If the stranger perceived it, he gave no attention. Our Heavenly Father has heard the prayer of his servant and your steward, and will grant it, if such shall be your desire, after I, his messenger, have explained to you its import, its full import. For it is like unto many of the prayers of men, in that it asks for more than he that utters it is aware of, except he pause and think. You have heard the prayer of your servant. Has he paused and taken thought? Is it one prayer? No, it is two. One uttered, the other not. Both have fallen on the ears of him that heareth all supplications, the spoken and unspoken. Ponder this. Keep it in mind when you beseech a blessing on yourself. Beware lest you invoke a curse upon your neighbor. When you pray for the blessing of rain to fall upon your crops, by that act you are possibly bringing down a curse upon your neighbor's crops that do not need the rain and can be injured by it. I am commissioned of God to put into words the other part, the part that your pastor and you in your hearts fervently prayed silently and ignorantly and unthinkingly. God grant that it was so. You heard these words. Grant us victory, O Lord our God. That alone is sufficient. The whole of the uttered prayer is compact into those pregnant words. Elaborations were unnecessary. When you have prayed for victory, you have prayed for many unmentioned results that follow victory, must follow it, cannot help but follow it. Upon the living Spirit of God fell the unuttered part. I am commanded to put it into words. Listen. O Lord our Father, we send forth our patriots, idols of our hearts, into battle. Be thou near them. With them in spirit, we also go forth from the sweet peace of our beloved firesides to smite the foe. Help us to tear their soldiers to bloody shreds with our shells. Help us to cover their smiling fields with the pale forms of their patriot dead. Help us to drown the thunder of the guns with the shrieks of their wounded, writhing in pain. Help us to wreak havoc upon their homes with a hurricane of fire. Help us to wring the hearts of their unoffending widows with unavailing grief and turn them out roofless with their little children to wander the wastes of their desolated land with rags and hunger and thirst. Sports of the sun flames of summer and the icy winds of winter. Broken in spirit, worn with travail, imploring thee for the refuge of the grave and denied it. For our sakes who adore thee, Lord, blast their hopes, blight their lives, protract their bitter pilgrimage, make weary their steps, water their way with tears, stain the white snow with the blood of their wounded feet. We ask in the spirit of love, of Him who is the source of love and a constant friend and refuge to all who are sore beset and seek His aid and comfort with humble and contrite hearts. Amen. You have prayed it. If you still desire it, speak. The messenger of the Most High awaits. It was believed afterwards that the man was a lunatic because there was no sense in what he said. I want to read you another passage from Huckleberry Finn. Huck is faced with a moral dilemma, whether or not to write the letter to the owner telling of the runaway slave Jim's whereabouts, who was his companion and friend on the trip downriver. It made me shiver. I about made up my mind to pray, see if I couldn't stop being the kind of boy I was and be better. So I kneeled down. But the words wouldn't come. Why wouldn't they? Weren't no use trying to hide from him. Weren't no use trying to hide from me neither. I knew very well why they wouldn't come. Because I weren't straight in my heart. Because I weren't square. Because I was playing double. I was letting on to give up sin. Deep down, I was holding on to the biggest one of all. Making my mouth to say I'd do the right thing and the clean thing and write that letter to the owner telling of Jim's whereabouts. But deep down in me, I knowed it was a lie. And he knowed it. You can't pray a lie. I found that out. So I was full of trouble. As full as I'd ever been. I didn't know what to do. Then I thought, I'll write the letter first, then see if I can pray. Well, I was astonished. I felt light as a feather right straight off. All my troubles washed away. Well, I picked up that pencil and paper, and glad and excited, I sat down and wrote, Miss Watson, your runaway slave Jim is down here 2 miles below Pikesville. Mr. Phelps has him and will give him up for the reward if you send. Huck Finn. I felt good. I felt all clean and washed of sin for the first time I'd ever felt so in my life. And I knowed I could pray now. But I didn't do it straight off. I set to thinking how good it was all this happened so. And how near I come to being lost and going to hell. And I kept on thinking. Think about our trip downriver. And I see Jim above me all the time. Sometimes at night, sometimes in the daytime, sometimes in moonlight or in the storms. See him standing my watch on top of his'n instead of calling me so I could go on sleeping. I couldn't find no places in myself to harden me against him, but only the other kind. I see him how glad he was when I came in out of the fog. And again, when I found him in the swamp up there where the feud was, in such like times, and how he always called me honey, and he pet me, do everything he think of for me. And at last I struck on the time I saved him by telling the men we had smallpox aboard. And how he say, I was the best friend Jim had in the whole world, and the only friend now. He's so grateful. I happen to turn and I see that paper. It was a close place. I picked it up. I held it in my hands, and I was trembling because I'd got to choose forever betwixt two things, and I knowed it. And I studied a minute, sort of holding my breath. And then I says to myself, all right then, I'll go to hell. And I tore it up. Dear Mark Twain, my life is a failure. I have adored madly, wildly, and she whom I love has turned coldly from me, set her affections on another. What advice would you give me? Dear discarded lover, you should set your affections on another also, on several if there are enough to go around. There is an absurd notion put forth in novels that the happier a girl is with her newfound love, the happier is the man whom she blighted. Don't allow yourself to believe such nonsense. The more cause she has to regret that she did not marry you, the more comfortable you'll be about the whole matter. This isn't poetical, but it is very sound doctrine. Many years ago, I was approached by a young man who had studied my work over a lengthy period, a fact verified by his sleepy and disoriented look. And he asked me, what single most quality does a writer need in order to be successful? I was gratified I could answer him promptly, and I did. I said, I didn't know. The rest of my personal philosophy can be summed up in this: always do right. It will gratify some people and astonish the rest. Good night. I am a sublime fool, but I am God's fool. And His works are to be contemplated with respect